The bitter wind swept across the Nebraska plains, carrying the scent of snow and sage as the first light of January dawned over Fort Robinson. Within the wooden stockade, Lakota warriors huddled in silence, their breaths rising in visible puffs, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of betrayal. Crazy Horse, tall and resolute, adjusted the folds of his buffalo hide coat, feeling the weight of both prophecy and mortal danger pressing upon him. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the nearby village, a fragile reminder of life and tradition under the looming shadow of military authority. The distant drumbeats of the soldiers' encampment mingled with the mournful cry of a lone hawk circling the gray sky, signaling an uncertain day ahead. Elders gathered near the fire, whispering tales of past victories and warnings, their voices trembling with both reverence and fear. Every footprint in the snow told a story of hunters, of scouts, of a people who had survived centuries of displacement and were now on the edge of a new chapter. And as the sun rose higher, the plains held their breath, waiting for the events that would forever mark the betrayal and fall of a great leader. The treaties signed decades earlier had redrawn the Great Plains on paper, but not in the hearts of the Lakota. Government agents in distant offices counted land parcels, unaware of the sacred rivers and hunting grounds they disrupted. Railroads carved iron lines through prairies, signaling progress to some and a creeping erasure to others. Fort Robinson itself was a symbol, a concrete reminder of authority, of a presence both protective and oppressive. Buffalo herds, once endless, thinned under relentless hunting, striking fear into communities dependent on them for life and ritual. Merchants and traders moved in, exchanging goods for furs and labor, subtly altering economies that had endured for generations. Rumors of forced relocations spread through council fires, whispered in low tones by messengers and scouts. Settlers' cabins dotted the landscape, each a small claim, each a challenge to centuries of indigenous land stewardship. Disease lingered silently, crossing rivers and valleys, leaving families fractured and elders weakened. The U.S. Army tightened patrols along borders marked by treaties, their presence a constant pressure on daily life. Missionaries arrived, carrying both education and a message that native ways were obstacles to civilization. Debates erupted in councils whether to resist, negotiate, or seek compromise, each option heavy with potential loss. The voices of women carried warnings and counsel, guiding decisions that men often debated with rigid pride. Scouts returned with reports of shifting patrols and new forts, each movement altering the delicate balance of power. Trade posts became meeting grounds where alliances and rivalries intertwined in whispered strategy. The rivers that nourished crops and communities now marked boundaries claimed by law but not by tradition. Horses, once symbols of freedom, became tools of war and negotiation, their ownership contested in subtle maneuvers. Snow-covered trails held the weight of history, each path a reminder of migration treaties and past confrontations. The neighboring tribes watched warily, their own positions shifting as federal policies moved like shadowed chess pieces. Council fires burned long into the night, smoke curling toward the stars, carrying prayers for guidance and justice. Reports from distant forts reached tribal leaders sporadically, always incomplete, always urgent. Families prepared for the worst, storing food, reinforcing lodges, and teaching children the rights of survival. Every conversation, every footstep was colored by the knowledge that an irreversible change was approaching. And above it all, the wind across the plains seemed to whisper a warning. The old maps no longer held the truths of the land. Crazy Horse stood at the edge of the coulee, eyes scanning the horizon with a mixture of resolve and quiet calculation. Born of the Oglala Lakota, he carried the legacy of his ancestors in every scar, every gesture, every measured step. His horse, black as midnight, pawed the frozen earth, a silent companion to the man who bore the weight of his people's hopes. In council fires, he listened more than he spoke, but when he did, his words commanded respect, even fear. The children watched from a distance, learning courage in silence, understanding that leadership demanded sacrifice. Elders spoke of visions he had as a boy, signs that marked him for a path both revered and perilous. His enemies saw a formidable warrior. His people saw a guardian of land culture and memory. Each raid he led, each negotiation he entered, was guided by a code older than any written law. He remembered the buffalo drives of his youth, the rhythm of the plains teaching strategy, patience, and endurance. Crazy Horse's family, his mother, brothers, and cousins anchored him, reminding him that every decision rippled across generations. Symbols of his people's identity, the feathered war bonnet, The painted visage were not vanity, but a testament to commitment. Even in solitude, he rehearsed maneuvers balancing instinct with knowledge passed down from scouts and warriors before him. He carried the ghosts of those lost to earlier battles, a quiet reverence shaping his every choice. The Lakota relied on his insight, on his uncanny ability to read terrain men and hearts alike. And as the sun fell behind distant mesas, he stood alone for a moment, a silhouette against the crimson sky, embodying the spirit of a people under siege. Every step forward was both a promise and a warning he would lead, but at a cost only history could measure. The morning air was sharp with frost as word arrived that a military detachment was approaching the encampment. Orders had come down from distant offices. All Lakota were to report, submit weapons, and relocate under strict supervision. Whispers spread through the lodges carrying fear, anger, and the unspoken understanding that trust had been broken. Crazy Horse paced along the frozen riverbank, his mind racing through strategy, honor, and the impossible choices ahead. A scout returned breathless, reporting soldiers dismantling nearby lodges, taking provisions, and leaving only cold earth behind. The elders gathered urgently, their voices low, but intense, recalling treaties broken and promises forgotten. Families clutched children preparing for flight or confrontation, knowing that any hesitation could mean catastrophe. A messenger brought news of allied tribes being rounded up, their resistance already crushed, fueling both dread and resolve. The wind carried the distant sound of hoofbeats, each one a harbinger of the conflict that could no longer be avoided. Crazy Horse met with other leaders, debating whether to negotiate or defend, their faces etched with worry and determination. Smoke from the fort's chimneys rose stark against the cold sky, a reminder that authority was near and relentless. Every trail leading from the encampment was under observation, constraining movement, testing patience and fortitude. The people whispered prayers to spirits and ancestors, seeking guidance in a moment when survival and principle collided. And as night fell, the plains seemed to hold their breath, bracing for the actions that would ignite the first irreversible flames of betrayal. Snow drifted across the rolling plains, blanketing the trails and concealing footprints from both warriors and soldiers. Crazy Horse surveyed the coulee ahead, noting the subtle ridges that could shield his scouts and ambushers alike. The fort's pickets moved cautiously, unaware of the hidden depressions and gullies that offered both cover and danger. A messenger arrived, breathless warning of a troop detachment advancing faster than anticipated, throwing plans into sudden urgency. Warriors mounted their horses' reins taut as icy wind bit at their faces, sharpening senses and tension. The first volley of scouts returned, reporting gaps in the enemy line and signs of overconfidence. Crazy Horse's hand traced the terrain, calculating angles where a sudden pivot could change the battle's momentum. A misread signal among allied warriors caused a momentary halt, giving the soldiers precious seconds to regroup. Snow and frozen ground shifted beneath charging hooves, slowing momentum and altering timing by crucial fractions. From a distant ridge, an observer noted the fort's cannon placements, mapping trajectories against the rising sun. The first exchange of arrows and gunfire rang across the coulee, echoing off icy rocks and scattered pines. Chaos rippled as a contingent misjudged the slope, sliding into a shallow ravine, forcing a sudden realignment. Crazy Horse issued a rapid hand signal, redirecting forces through narrow corridors between rocks and snowdrifts. Soldiers attempted a flanking maneuver, only to find themselves constrained by terrain they had ignored in planning. A sudden gust of wind carried dust and snow into faces, blinding and disorienting both sides in equal measure. A council of young warriors made a daring push, exploiting a weakness in the enemy's left, turning the tide incrementally. Messages passed swiftly along the line, ensuring coordination despite the chaos of shifting terrain. The soldiers' attempt to deploy a new cannon faltered when frozen ground caused the wheels to skid, creating a dangerous bottleneck. Crazy Horse pressed forward, using cover and the natural contours of the land to neutralize the numerical advantage. Smoke and snow combined, creating a gray veil, masking intentions and confusing both attackers and defenders. A misfired musket sparked panic among a small detachment, forcing an unintended retreat and opening a gap in the enemy line. Strategic hills provided vantage points, allowing scouts to relay positions and anticipate the fort's movements. The clash of forces produced sudden, sharp shifts. Small errors cascaded into larger opportunities for the Lakota. Warriors moved like shadows across ridges and gullies, exploiting every fold in the land with precision learned over years. The fort's commander struggled to maintain control, unaware that the terrain itself favored the defenders' intimate knowledge of the plains. By midday, the engagement had reached a pivotal point, neither side fully advancing, yet the momentum subtly tipping. Crazy Horse paused atop a ridge, signaling the next maneuver, aware that one more misstep could reverse everything. And as the sun began its descent, the first set piece ended, leaving both sides battered the landscape itself, marked by the struggle that had unfolded. Official dispatches claimed that Crazy Horse surrendered peacefully under orders from tribal leaders at Fort Robinson. Yet, in a hidden journal, a scout wrote of tension whispers and fear, describing a leader unwilling to be confined. The government report described a calm negotiation, citing adherence to protocol and mutual respect. Oral tradition tells of deception, a deliberate betrayal, and the mounting dread among warriors and families. Soldiers' records noted compliance and measured steps, portraying the Lakota as orderly and cooperative. Eyewitness accounts passed down in families spoke, instead of hesitation, confusion, and the silent pressure of mistrust. A ledger entry marks the exact time of Crazy Horse's meeting with officers, presenting it as routine. Folklore insists that he arrived under duress, aware that any misstep could be fatal. His dignity intact, but threatened. Administrative memos emphasize formality, citing dates, signatures, and procedural steps. Meanwhile, a diary kept by a young warrior recounts the subtle gestures, the exchanged glances, and the tension that hung thick in the stockade. Maps drawn by officials show orderly encampments, yet oral accounts describe hidden trails, secret signals, and scouts ready for action. Military clerks wrote of a surrender that never faltered, while elders recounted bravery in the face of imminent betrayal. The two narratives clash, one sanitized, one vivid, one impersonal, one human, both claiming truth. And as the plains lay quiet, the discrepancy remained, echoing the unresolved tensions between history written and history remembered. The morning sun glinted off the frozen ground as tension coiled through the encampment like a living thing. Families stirred, wrapping children in furs, preparing for the uncertainty that loomed with each passing hour. Crazy Horse moved among his warriors, checking weapons, offering quiet counsel, his presence both anchor and shield. The distant sound of horse hooves grew louder, signaling the approach of patrols, each beat echoing dread. Elders whispered prayers, their chants weaving through the bitter air, invoking protection from spirits and ancestors. Scouts returned with reports of soldiers adjusting positions, each shift a new threat, a new challenge. Women carried supplies to hidden caches, glancing nervously at the ridge lines where eyes could be watching. Children followed silently, learning courage in small gestures, their innocence juxtaposed against a growing fear. A misstep by a young warrior startled a horse, the sudden clatter sending a ripple of alarm across the line. Crazy Horse raised his hand, calming the motion, eyes steady, commanding composure amid chaos. Negotiations faltered. Messengers exchanged tense words, each phrase laden with risk and unspoken consequences. A gust of wind whipped snow across the plains, blinding eyes, masking intentions, heightening suspense. A contingent of soldiers attempted a maneuver through a narrow pass, only to find the terrain treacherous and slow. Whispers of betrayal ran through the camp as rumors of broken promises and hidden orders reached eager ears. Warriors and civilians alike felt the weight of history pressing on them, each decision pregnant with potential disaster. The horses snorted, sensing the anxiety, their movements mirroring the human tension in the encampment. Elders gestured to the younger men, pointing out vantage points and defensive positions, teaching survival under fire. A child's cry pierced the cold air, drawing attention, yet reminding everyone of the stakes, the lives at risk. Smoke from fires curled upward, a visual heartbeat of the community, steady even as nerves frayed. Crazy Horse consulted with allies, mapping contingencies, anticipating enemy movements, preparing for sudden turns. Every footstep on frozen ground carried weight. Each movement scrutinized, each glance significant. The soldiers' shouts grew nearer, their strategy unfolding, while the Lakota adapted fluidly, aware of every ridge and hollow. Night descended, shadows lengthening the tension, transforming into a palpable, almost physical force over the encampment. And as the stars appeared over the plains, the people held their breath, poised on the edge of actions that could define their fate. The morning sun cast long shadows as soldiers and warriors faced each other, every muscle taut, every eye fixed. A sudden shout pierced the air, signaling the first irreversible move and the plains seemed to hold their breath. Crazy Horse rode forward, the black horse charging through snow and ice, defiance etched into every line of his face. Gunfire erupted, mingling with the howl of wind, echoing across the frozen ridges. A symphony of chaos and inevitability. Warriors responded with precision arrows and rifles, finding their marks, but each action carried risk and cost. A misstep by a soldier sent a volley astray, shattering the fragile balance, forcing abrupt reactions across both sides. Families huddled behind natural cover, praying silently as the conflict escalated, powerless to intervene, yet bound to witness. Crazy Horse signaled a feint, drawing part of the troops away from the central struggle, a maneuver born of instinct and experience. The fort's officers attempted to regroup, shouting orders, but terrain and tension conspired against them. Scouts relayed urgent messages, coordinating moves across ridges and gullies, every second critical. The wind carried snow and smoke, obscuring vision, heightening confusion, and making each decision a gamble. An elder cried out, warning of a flank unseen, a last opportunity for intervention slipping away. Warriors surged forward, exploiting every advantage, the clash intensifying to a point from which no retreat was possible. Crazy Horse faced direct confrontation, exchanging fire strategy and willpower, with soldiers determined to enforce authority. A misread signal caused momentary chaos, but quick thinking restored order, keeping the fight alive on both sides. The sky darkened as clouds gathered, snow falling in heavier sheets, adding urgency and obscuring the battlefield. Voices shouted, horses reared, and the cacophony of war intertwined with cries of fear, courage, and determination. Every ridge and hollow became a stage for decisive action, each choice magnified by the presence of life and death. A cannon fired, shaking the frozen ground, sending shockwaves through men and horses alike, marking a turning point. Crazy Horse maneuvered with relentless skill, knowing that the outcome of this day would seal the fate of many. Families and warriors alike held their breath, watching as moments crystallized into history, irreversible and absolute. By midday, the struggle had reached its zenith, no side able to retreat, each move committing them further to fate. And as the sun sank low, the battlefield fell silent, leaving only footprint smoke and the echoes of decisions that could never be undone. The plains felt emptier, the trails once busy now quiet, marked only by footprints fading into snow. Fort Robinson loomed larger in memory, a symbol of authority that reshaped the landscape and the people's freedom. Lakota families regrouped in smaller, scattered encampments, adjusting to the loss of territory and hunting grounds. The elders convened councils, weighing the decisions that had led to betrayal and the measures needed for survival. Survivors recounted the day's events, their stories blending sorrow with cautious pride in the bravery displayed. Buffalo herds continued to dwindle, forcing communities to adapt their diet rituals and migratory patterns. Some warriors relocated to allied tribes, negotiating temporary shelter and support while navigating new political boundaries. Government maps were updated, redrawing reservations and reallocating land, often without regard for traditional sacred sites. Young men trained rigorously, aware that preserving knowledge and defense skills was now a matter of life and culture. Women maintained food stores, crafted clothing, and preserved oral histories, ensuring continuity amid upheaval. Trading posts and missions became pivotal points of interaction, influencing economic and social adaptation strategies. Prayers and ceremonies persisted, keeping connections alive with ancestors despite the upheaval and displacement. Letters and reports reached distant officials, documenting shifts in control, population, and territorial claims. Communities balanced mourning with resilience, fostering unity while planning for uncertain futures. The riverbanks, once bustling with life, now held reminders of what had been lost and the fragile persistence of survival. And as seasons turned, the people looked to the horizon, carrying memory and determination, reshaping their world on the new map of reality. The snow had melted from the plains, leaving subtle traces of where lives and histories had intersected. Elders recounted stories by the fire, teaching children the names of the land in Lakota, preserving endonyms and memory. Songs rose in the evening air, carrying the grief, pride, and resilience of a people who endured countless trials. Families gathered at sacred sites, performing ceremonies that honored both ancestors and the spirits of warriors lost. The names of villages and rivers were spoken with reverence, linking past and present in a tapestry of memory. Young warriors trained not only in skill, but in the understanding of heritage, responsibility, and moral courage. Community members documented stories in journals and oral recordings, ensuring that truth survived beyond written history. The landscape itself became a living archive, with each ridge, river, and hollow echoing events long past. Scholars visiting the plains observed the rituals, noting how cultural memory persisted despite displacement and trauma. Songs, dances, and stories intertwined, creating a rhythm of remembrance that both mourned loss and celebrated endurance. Children learned the significance of name ceremonies and the land itself carrying forward a living legacy. And as the sun set over the horizon, the people stood together, remembering, teaching, and quietly asserting that their history would never be erased.